All right, welcome back to Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Jason Ogden from Sweet Home PD in Oregon. He has 27 years experience in law enforcement. Really looking forward to today's conversation. So welcome, Chief Ogden. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me on your podcast. I feel honored and I'm excited about today.
Thank you. I am too. We talked a little bit offline just to kind of get to know each other and kind of prep a, a direction for
Yes.
today. And I'm really, really looking forward to it. You said a few things that I thought were so powerful and so relatable, and I'm really looking forward to diving into that today and sharing that with our listeners. But I was hoping first that you could give a little bit of background on you. How did you get started in law enforcement? What did those 27 years look like for you?
Yeah, so I remember, all the way back to junior high, I just had this interest in getting into this career. At the time, we had somebody in the church that I was going to, where I grew up, who was in law enforcement. Ended up doing some ride-alongs over the years, and I just thought, man, this is the career, this is the career for me. So yeah, it's been fun. I've spent most of my time here at Sweet Home PD, with the exception of a short amount of time somewhere else at a larger agency. But we ended up coming back here and yeah, just kind of worked my way through, I guess, the ranks, from officer to detective to patrol sergeant, captain, chief, and then right now, just kind of in a unique situation here in the city in a dual role as our city manager and chief of police. So it's been fun. It's been challenging, ups and downs, as you can imagine. So, but yeah, I'm super thankful for this career, and I just have a heart for it.
Yeah. And you're not busy at all.
Yeah, yeah, not busy at all. But I just keep t telling people that I've got a great team here at the PD. We've got a good team over at City Hall. So at least for this season right now, it allows me to do that dual role.
That's great. I love that. And I know that you're a smaller agency. And for anyone listening who doesn't realize, the majority of law enforcement agencies across the country are smaller agencies. And I know that there's a lot of unique challenges that kind of come with that in the sense of, limited resources and, being so tight knit within the organization that maybe some things like peer support are a little bit more challenging. And so I was hoping that maybe you could explain some of the unique challenges that you find, being in an executive level of a smaller agency.
Yeah, I think when we when we were thinking about wellness and trying to start a wellness program, it's like, well, where do we even begin?
Mm.
Because we have a neighboring agency that is considerably larger than us that has a phenomenal wellness program. And I mean, like, they have a full-on weight room. They have like somebody that comes in and does massages. I can't even remember everything, but it is like top tier. And so it's like, well, we can't, we've got, 21 total employees, 16 officers. I mean, in a limited budget, how are we going to compete with that? And so yeah, that's really one of the biggest challenges is, how do we implement something that's going to um, be able to be scaled down to an agency our size to fit within the budget that we have. And then, being a smaller agency, there is just constant turnover, and people want to move up in their career and have other opportunities that other larger agencies offer, have some better pay that other larger agencies offer. So with this constant turnover, it just feels like you're kind of spinning your wheels, and something like a wellness program kind of gets put on the back burner because now we're trying to play catch up in getting people hired and covering the road when there's open positions. And so it's just it 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 seems like it's difficult to make wellness a priority, but nonetheless, we've tried to do that here.
Yeah. And, from what I understand, and you can tell me if you're seeing the same thing, what I'm understanding is that there are a lot of agencies that are um, offering, signing on bonuses or some sort
Correct.
of incentive. And so it's enticing for people to lateral. And we're seeing, the younger generation kind of bouncing maybe every couple of years, agency to agency, because they're getting that, monetary incentive for doing so. Are you seeing that same thing happening?
Oh, absolutely. We, in fact, you know it's getting bad not only when a lateral is offered a sign-on bonus, but I there's an agency near us that their officers actually get a bonus or incentive pay if they recruit somebody, and so it's like, oh man, how do we compete with that?
Yeah. Well, they're using their current employees as a recruitment tool.
Correct. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think, because, I've had conversations about this too, that, the younger generation maybe isn't always looking for the highest pay, that there's other things that are important to them, like wellness programming or, um, quality of life within the community and what that looks like. Are you seeing that maybe money isn't always the thing that is enticing, that maybe by having, wellness offerings, that is something that's bringing new people in?
Yeah, I think so. The generation that we're seeing come in now, I think that they are looking at other things other than just pay. One of the big things I think that we have seen when we negotiate for wages and compensation with our union here is, time off. Time off is pretty important, and we all know just how important that is just to kind of decompress and to have time off. And so there are other things like that, above and beyond just pay for sure.
Yeah, I love that you said that because I feel like the conversations I have sometimes go in waves and there's similarities. And I've had this conversation a few times about the importance of time off and how people really value vacation time, time with their family, their friends, not being called in on their day off.
Yes,
Not having
yes,
their day off requests being canceled.
yes.
And so I agree with you. I think that there are some other things, but again, it goes back to the challenge. Well, what if there's an organization that has both?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, we've tried to do some things, with be creative with that as far as wellness goes. I mean, we've only done it a few times, but I mean, we've given our road sergeants permission to say, like, if somebody had a really bad call, give them a day off, a mental health day. It doesn't come out of their accruals. Just give them time off.
Yeah.
Because I think that's,
Yeah, I agree. I know when we talked offline, you said this really powerful statement. And I want to share this if that's okay with you, with
yeah,
anyone
go
who's
for it.
listening. You said that wellness isn't about the muscles you build, but the stories our bodies hold internally. I was hoping that you could explain what you meant by that.
Yeah. You know, it's kind of a longer answer, but
We
I
have
think,
time.
yeah, I think that I'll kind of just kind of go back to, I think that a lot of us in law enforcement, I think one of the reasons that we are attracted to this career, now this is a bit of a blanket statement, but I bet that a lot of us feel this way, is that we, um, probably grew up in homes where there wasn't a lot of room or maybe even safety to kind of like feel things out loud. And maybe this is a generational thing, but emotions not being talked about, emotions being minimized and in some cases even punished for it. And so I think we kind of learned early on to just kind of stay tough, stay quiet, stay in control. And that really made us, I think, good for this job. And so were attracted to careers like this. And so I think law enforcement rewards those, kind of traits, right? We're trained to push through, not to get caught up in emotion, to stay, focused on the mission. But there comes a cost, with that. And so you end up in your career pushing these things down and never really engaging with those feelings, right? And those feelings, they're somewhere, they're stored in the body. And if you don't process those feelings, then you are going to cope in ways that you never intended to go. And so I think that's true. I think our bodies, store these things. And if you're not processing them in ways, you're going to cope and you're going to do things that you never really wanted to do, never intended to do, that are unhealthy for you, unhealthy for your families, unhealthy for your work life, right? And I remember as I was kind of working through my own stuff, I had a therapist tell me about a book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And I'm telling you that book was really an eye opener. It was like, man, this stuff does get stored in your body. And if you don't deal with it in healthy ways, then um, you're going to be a mess.
Yeah, 100%. And I really appreciate you, being vulnerable enough to say that, like, you experienced some things and this book is something that helped you, and I can deeply relate to that too, like different situations. But I also, like, I grew up in a really toxic home environment. I, from a really young age, learned to shove things down and to throw away the key and
Yeah,
posture up and build a wall that was impenetrable and keep
totally.
going. And I know what it's like to not have resources. I know what it's like to have all of those things that you throw to the bottom bubble back up to the surface, and what that
Yep.
does to your life.
Yep.
And I do have experience with, escaping and numbing and avoiding. And I know in speaking with you offline that maybe you had some experiences throughout your career of, different coping mechanisms and not processing certain things. How did that um, impact your life and your career? Maybe not having the resources or not knowing to reach for things.
Yeah, I think, you don't know what you don't know. And so I didn't know that I didn't know that I was just emotionally kind of unengaged and just kind of coasting through life. And, I just found myself, drinking too much, using nicotine, especially on night shift to stay awake, using caffeine, things like that. And really just using those types of things to just kind of zone out or like, online gaming. Yeah, it's fun, but not at the expense of connecting, with your family. And so you just kind of have all of these things that you use to medicate with, and it has an impact not only on you but on other people. And so I think I just didn't realize that I was numbing out until I actually got into some counseling and therapy. It was like, wow, okay. I began making some connections that I don't think I had the tools on my, tool belt, so to speak, to kind of deal with this stuff and to recognize that I was just somebody that was unhealthy and emotionally unengaged, and that it was really impacting, relationship with my wife and kids and family. And so yeah, once I began to kind of put some tools on my tool belt and recognize these things, I was able to move forward little by little and just kind of bring healing to all of these areas of my life. And it's made me a better husband, a better dad, a better leader at work. So yeah, it's been really good.
And it's so freeing. It's so much lighter, and it's life-changing when you are able to use those tools to process the things. And you know, kind of going back to what you said about, like, the body keeps the score, and I agree that book is great. It's really heady, but it's really informational. So anyone who's listening to this, get it on audio and put it in your car, and it is really educational. But I think, to your point, it's like You don't know what you don't know, and you don't know how bad you feel because you forgot what it felt like to feel good.
100%. I do. I totally agree with that. And when I started actually engaging with, like, when you spend some time in counseling or therapy, and if you are somebody that is emotionally checked out, you begin working on things like, man, where is that feeling in my gut coming from? Why am I actually feeling that? And so you begin to be curious
Mhm.
about, what's going on in my body. And when you begin to be curious about that, you're like, okay, so I have these butterflies in my stomach right now. Why is that? Or, I'm headed to this call and I had this feeling inside of me. What is that? Let's explore that. And it is so nice to be able to engage with your emotions and just be honest about where you're at.
Yeah.
Whether they be, you're happy, or whether you're sad or depressed or whatever, at least recognizing those things and being able to engage with it is so much better than just keeping it stuffed down. It's just been really life-changing.
Yeah. It's also really scary, and I think that this idea of self-medicating is because you don't want to feel the hard things. Like you don't want to like go through the scary stuff. And so it's like your body and your mind wants to take that path of least resistance of like this feels good. Like you
Yep,
said, numbing out,
yep,
disengaging, avoiding, like that
yep,
feels good. And I also think that there's shame that comes with it of like, well, I don't want to be a burden on other people. And so
yes,
I'm just going to isolate and keep it to myself and I'm going to do the
yes,
things that make me feel better. And
yes.
I had a personal experience one time. It was, I had like a crossroad moment in my life, and it was kind of like, do I take this road that I'm on right now and I end up like my parents, which was my worst nightmares. Both my parents were drug addicts, and that was kind of the expectation that I was going to end up like them. Or do I take a healthier path for myself and choose something better? And it was through that journey that I was able to start processing things and but it was scary and I shoved those things down there for a reason because I
Yep,
didn't want to deal with them.
yes,
I was in a class where the teacher made us sit in a circle. I think you might know where I'm going with this, but sit in a circle and like silently meditate together. And I at that time was not ready for that. And that's one of the things that like I try to be very conscious of. I think that you need a safe space to be able
yes,
to do things. And in that moment, it was strangers. I didn't know them. And it was a very uncomfortable meditation when at the time,
yeah,
like I was still trying to process those things that I had shoved down. I still had flashbacks and things of that nature. And at the end of it, I ran out of the class in hysteria. And I talked to the teacher after and I said, I'm scared to know what's down there. I told him, I was like, I don't want to know what's down there. I don't want to relive that. I don't want to have to go through it. And he looked at me, and this was a very pivotal moment in my life where he said, Paige, if you don't want to sit with yourself, how are you ever going to expect anyone else to want to sit with you? And it was this moment of like, oh my gosh, okay, like I have to take care of myself. If I want people to support me, if I want people in my life, if I want positive relationships, like I have to be able to have the courage to go through the hard stuff.
yes,
And I think the only way out is through.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree with you, and I agree with the safe space. Um, I feel pretty fortunate to be connected with a counselor therapist that, you know, provides that safe space, right? And what I loved about this guy that I'm seeing is I knew that it was going to be a good fit from the beginning when he said, "Hey, I just want you to know that there's a possibility that we may not like connect emotionally, or it just doesn't feel right, and that's okay. You can dump me anytime, and I just want you to know that if you're not comfortable, then find somebody else that's going to work." And so I was like, oh man, I know this guy's going to be perfect. And so it has provided a safe place to kind of engage with your story, right? because when you actually are communicating with somebody and talking about hard things and they are really emotionally attuned to you, it makes you feel like you're not crazy, right? It's like, okay, this is somebody that gets it. This is somebody that understands, and I don't have to feel shame and I don't have to feel, weird about talking about this stuff. And so it's just been really good because I've been able to see that the way that I am living my life presently, how I'm reacting to things presently is almost always connected to past experiences, almost always. And what I've learned is until I name those connections, I will keep reacting in ways that I don't fully understand. And so he's kind of turned me on to a couple of people, Adam Young and Dan Allender. And Adam Young is a therapist, has a podcast called The Place We Find Ourselves. And Adam constantly says that you can't heal from what you haven't felt. And I
Mhm.
think that that's true. Like we have these stories in our lives that we just kind of bury and but they're never actually gone. They're living in your body. They live in our nervous system, in our muscle memory. And um, it's pretty amazing that when you start engaging with this stuff in a safe environment, things, you just start healing in ways that it's, difficult to understand. And I don't know. Dan Allender says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that if you don't attend to your own brokenness, you will lead in ways that break others, often without realizing it. And so I was seeing these things in myself. And as soon as I began kind of engaging with some of these things in my own life, whether it be from work or in the marriage or in parenting, or from childhood, once I started engaging with the hard stuff and actually, feeling and naming what is true about those experiences, it's been really life changing.
Yeah, that statement that you said was so powerful. And I've never ever heard anyone say it that way. And it really resonated. And, I've always said that your perception, your perspective on things is based on your preconditioning and your past experiences. And so it kind of goes along with that of like, you're going to continue that if you don't deal with your preconditioning, if you don't try to, like you
Yep.
said, name it and understand it, and then you can choose a different perspective on things. And I think that
Yep.
people don't realize that, like, this is all trained behavior,
Yeah.
and you have the ability to retrain or untrain anything you want, but it does take that effort. And I know you said therapy has been something that's been life changing for you. I think you said offline that EMDR is also
Hmm.
something that you've used.
Yeah.
What was your experience with that?
So it was actually really interesting. I remember the first time I did EMDR, and for those who don't know, it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And so it's a trauma therapy that basically helps rewire how the brain and body respond to painful memories, right? So it uses what they call bilateral stimulation. So it's like eye movement or tapping while you revisit some of these stuck moments, not necessarily to relive them, but to kind of process them differently, more safely, more truthfully. And so it was so weird. I remember the first time I did this, I was engaging with like memory, and there's different ways that EMDR takes place. There's some, from what I understand, there's some stuff that you can do online now that is really good with your therapist if you have an online therapist. This one was I actually did in person, and I held these two things in my hand, and they were just little things that vibrated, and they would vibrate in one hand, vibrate in another, and then I had earmuff or headphones on, and there was a noise in this ear, and then a noise in this ear, and it'd go back and forth. It sounds really weird, but I remember after I did it, I was so relaxed. I felt like I wanted to fall asleep. It was so like it just I don't know how it works, but it takes those anxious things that are inside of you and you process it in a way that brings it down to a level where you are just kind of baseline. And I wanted to go to sleep. If I'm honest with you, it was so relaxing, and just I can see how that works, right? It just rewires your brain and helps you process these difficult things in a safe environment in a way that somehow scientifically works. It's just really kind of cool how the body works.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing the things that have worked for you, and I think it is inspiring to hear that. It's like, hey, like I've been through it. I know what it's like to come from, maybe a challenging home environment. I know what it's like to go through this job and this career and, see things and shove it down and not process those things. I know what it's like to have unhealthy coping mechanisms where you want to numb out and avoid those things, but I also know what it's like to find freedom from those things and find resources that helped to, um, improve my life and my relationships. What advice would you have for someone who's maybe struggling right now, who's maybe not making the best decisions, or who is, gravitating more towards the self-medication or the unhealthy coping mechanisms? What advice would you give just to start?
Yeah. Yeah, I honestly, um, I think the advice that I would give, I mean, obviously, if you are coping in ways that are unhealthy, and I think you have to come to the realization and ask yourself, why am I doing this? Because you're not just it's not just impacting you, and you may not see it initially, but you are really having a big impact on those around you, particularly your family. And I would honestly, I would just encourage you to explore that and to find a counselor or a therapist that's going to work. Particularly, there are therapists out there that deal specifically with trauma, and in this career, I mean, it is we're dealing with trauma on a daily basis, and I would just encourage people to be curious about that and just to explore, a therapist. It is not a weakness. I mean, I wouldn't consider it, oh, I'm weak because I got to go to counseling or therapy. No, you're just wanting to live life to, the fullest extent that you can as a human being that is meant to feel, right? When you shove things down and you start coping in ways that are unhealthy, uh, and you're not emotionally engaging with people, you're just less human, right? We're wired to be emotional people. And I think the advice that I would have is, man, explore some counseling or therapy. And if it doesn't work out with one person, move on to somebody else, somebody that you're going to connect with. That's what I would say, because I think that there's this stigma that, oh, if you go to counseling, then you're crazy or you've got issues. Well, we've all got issues, right? And and I think that's normal. And if you don't have issues, then I think that's weird.
I love that. If you don't have issues, I think that's weird. I actually, and of course I've felt this way. I also understand that there is a stigma and that there is this perception that asking for help or reaching for resources is weakness. But I wholeheartedly believe that it's courageous to seek
I
out
do.
resources. I do
I do
not
too.
think that that's weak at all. I have never felt stronger than when I took my own wellness into my own hands. I took control over it. Like, to me, that strength of saying, like, I'm in control. I'm going to go and I'm going to take care of myself. I felt my weakest when I felt like those things had control over me. The alcohol, the numbing, like the trauma, when that had control over me is when I felt my weakest. The strongest is when I was like, I have control over this and I'm going to choose a
Yep.
different path for myself. And so I think that, I mean, my hope is that through these conversations, we can start to flip that on its head and people really identify with the fact that there's courage involved in that, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah. I totally agree. I couldn't agree with that more. I think I feel the same way. Is when I started taking my health seriously, um, I felt braver and stronger and just more courageous to be able to, talk about these things. And it's like, well, we all struggle with these kinds of things. Some people struggle more than others, but we all really, I mean, we all live in a broken world and we all are impacted in ways by that. And particularly in a career where you are constantly dealing with traumatic incidences. And so I think it's okay to say, I'm not okay. I'm gonna explore that and get a little bit of help.
Do you think that because you are open with sharing your experiences and your story, do you think that that's given people within your organization permission to feel the same?
100%. It's interesting you asked that question because, the one piece of advice that I was going to give to chiefs or leaders was creating a culture where it's okay not to be okay. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but I mean, you know what I mean based on the context of this
Yeah.
podcast episode today. It's expected that people are going to struggle, and you have to create a culture where it's safe for them to say so. And yes, since I have been working on my own stuff, I have been more open about these things, and it has created a culture where I've had people come into my office and have these really personal conversations about stuff that's not even duty related, like off duty stuff. And there is no way I would have been able to engage or have these kinds of conversations without having done my own work.
Mhm.
100%. And so, yes, it opens the door for these connections within your agency with people, and it begins to build trust. It's like, oh, okay, so I'm not the only one that's struggling with things. You've struggled with things too. Great. It just creates a safe environment for that.
I actually wrote that down that, you as a leader, by doing that, are creating that safe space for people. And I do think that it's it is so isolating when you don't feel like people can relate to you,
Yes.
and when someone comes up and is like, oh, like I dealt with that too. Oh my gosh, that's an exhale. It's like,
Yes.
oh, like I'm not the only one. And it
Yes.
feels so good to know
Yes.
that there are other people around you. So,
Yes.
you in leadership, by sharing that and your experiences with people, you are creating that safe space for them to not feel alone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you want vulnerability in your department, you have to model it, right? You have to be okay with sharing your own story. And there's this quote that Dan Allender he often says, and Dan Allender uh, he founded the Allender Center in Seattle, and he has this narrative approach to healing from trauma. So it's basically about diving into your story. And he says you can only take people as far as you've gone in your own story. And I believe that 100% to be the truth, that you can transfer that idea over to leading, a department or, wherever you're at. As a leader, you can only take people as far as you've gone yourself, right? If you want to have a wellness program, if you want to engage people that way, you have to have been able to, do your own work yourself in your own life. And once you've done that, it just makes a huge impact because you're able to connect with people in ways and kind of be attuned to how they're feeling in ways that you've never been before.
And I think, the question that comes to my mind, because I do think we're in an interesting time where, executive leaders come from a culture and an environment where it was not okay to deal with those things. And we kind of talked about that a little bit, and like, they were trained and taught for their entire careers to, not show weakness and to, and wellness was never a thing. And now because of how things are changing and the younger generation coming in, expecting wellness and, creating that culture is almost something that's mandatory at this point, how do leaders who, maybe haven't dealt with those things create that culture? Is it that you have to start with them first? How do you, and how do you convince people who maybe still have that mindset of like, well, we don't really need this, because that's how they were trained.
Boy, that's a that's a really good question. Yeah, how do you convince them? I don't know how you convince people apart from doing some of the hard work yourself. And I don't want to say that, every leader or every chief, has, got to has to go to their own therapy or counseling, but I don't know. I mean, that's a really tough question because when, yeah, for me personally, it's like I always theoretically said, yeah, wellness is something that we need to provide, something that we need to offer. But until you come to some of these places or moments in your life where you kind of look back on 27 years that you've stuffed down and not really engaged with and not really, um, I don't know, just not really worked on yourself. I don't know how you lead an organization without having really engaged with some of the darker places in your own life yourself. I don't. I mean, you can have a program, but you're not going to be invested in the same way in wellness and connecting with your people unless you've actually kind of done that hard work yourself. So I don't know. That's a really difficult question, I think, to answer because it means so much more. Wellness means so much more to me now because I've actually engaged with some of those things myself and been vulnerable within my organization to some degree so that people feel like this is a safe place to talk about things like that. And so I don't know if that answers your question. Again, I don't want to say that, well, every leader and every chief needs to, get into therapy. Well, no, I'm not saying that. I don't know. I think that, for me personally, that is how it's been such, it's growing in importance, in our organization. So, I mean, we don't have it all figured out here. We certainly can do things so much better here, but at least I have more of a heart for that now than I did, 5 years ago or 2 years ago.
No, I appreciate that perspective. And I liked what you said of like, it's fine to have a program, but it's like, are you practicing those same things? And it's not a one size fits all. Like, maybe
Correct.
there are some people who like really gravitate towards, physical fitness as an outlet,
Yes.
or, maybe
Yeah.
one person really likes EMDR and one person really likes therapy. And there's lots of different things, but it's like one, like as a leader, I think, are you prioritizing your wellness? Because if you're going to tell other people to prioritize themselves, then there has to be maybe some level of prioritization on your end. But I also think it just gives you a little bit more perspective and empathy. And I think that that's a really important trait for anyone to have because when I was in my darkest point, I didn't have empathy for anybody. Again, like I was super hardened, and I came from this perspective of, well, if it didn't affect me, then why does it affect you? And I think
Right.
so often that happens when you don't have that opposite perspective and you don't have empathy for other people and what they're going through. And I'm not saying that everyone has that, but that was my personal experience that people would come to me and I'm like, that's not a big deal. Like, why are you crying? Like, get over it, you know?
Right.
And then
Right.
when I started dealing with my own stuff, I kind of realized where that came from, first of all, but then also it was like, oh, like I realized that things impact people differently. And I think
Yeah.
especially when we have this younger generation coming in, like they learn differently. They want to know more about the why. They're more in tune with their wellness. They really value, time off and different wellness resources that the organizations provide. So I think that if you can have empathy at the very least for like, okay, they might be affected by these things differently than I was, and that's okay. and,
Yeah.
and giving them permission in that way too. So I think through my journey of healing things, I was able to be more empathetic, even if something didn't impact me, understanding that everyone is different.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you said it. I think you summarized that perfectly. Empathy is so important, right? I mean, in law enforcement, I mean, you see how far that takes you, just even out on your calls for service, right? When you are empathetic towards other people, walls start to come down and you're able to engage and have conversations, with people out in the public in ways that you never would be able to if you came across as somebody who is just, unkind or hardened, or you need to do these things because I told you to. Well, if it, sometimes you need to get to that point and say that, but I think people respond more with empathy and kindness, and that goes the same, in your organization or same within your family, right? You need to be empathetic and kind, and people respond to that, and I think that's so important.
Yeah. Honey versus vinegar.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
Um, I have one final question for you, and this is in the context of wellness. And this is the reason why I started this podcast in the first place is, trying to bottle up your perspective, your words of wisdom, things you've learned throughout your career. And so my question is, in the context of wellness, what words of advice or words of wisdom would you share with someone who's younger in this career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known or something that's helped you along the way.
Yeah, in the context of this career in wellness, I wish I would have spearheaded my own wellness early on in my career. Because, uh, you're going to go on calls that are really disturbing, really disgusting, really scary, really graphic. And I just wish that I would have reached out for some help early on in my career, and been able to have some tools on my tool belt, so to speak, to be able to process this stuff. I just wish I would have. I wish I would have recognized that going to a counselor, going to a therapist, uh, just to process some of this stuff would have been so much more helpful than just bottling it up. And so, I mean, that's what I think my advice would be is, you know, engage these things in a safe environment in a way where you can actually be honest about how awful that call was that you went on last night, or how scary it was to have to deal with this certain situation. Like, be honest about those things in a safe environment and process those things in a way so that you don't end up stuffing these things and coping in all of these ways that it's going to impact you personally negatively and your family and friends. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. I I have loved this conversation. I just truly appreciate your time and your insights. That is all I have for you, but I want to give you the floor if there's anything we missed or anything you want to add.
I can't think of anything. I think we covered it pretty good. I mean, um, you know, we're seeing that wellness, the whole idea of wellness has been shifting over the years and it's becoming more of a priority. And so with that, I think we need to, think about ways in agencies, whether you're large or small, to engage our people in a way that, that promotes that. So, yeah.
I agree. Thank you again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I was happy to be on here and share a little bit of my story.
Of course. And I'm confident it's going to inspire others. And so, anyone who's still listening up to this point, we appreciate your time and hopefully this is something that helps to, take a step in the direction of wellness. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
yeah, thank you.